Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
We know her name. We know of her work. Her name holds a legacy far greater than many of us can comprehend, both on scientific and moral scales. Careful and detailed observations led to a long-term and significant understanding of chimpanzees and their deeply woven behaviors. She showed up with patience, respect, and the willingness to build trust with the species that resulted in outcomes many in her field would never have dreamed. She found a way to study the lives of and the world surrounding the chimpanzees, while also holding an immense amount of compassion not only for the animals but for the environment they called home. And this care, this understanding, only escalated from there. It was her work that set fire to the animal welfare movement, showed that animals are not thoughtless and running on instinct alone. She proved that they were incredibly smart, they were kind, they held respect for each other, and most of all, they feel emotion. Through her life, Jane was dedicated to not only revealing who chimpanzees truly are, but also echoing our own humanity, challenging us to act with kindness and stewardship toward all living creatures. Here is an ode to one of the most respected women in science, Dr. Jane Goodall. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello, I am your host, Kayla. Welcome back. Gosh, I feel like we are a week essentially away from Thanksgiving for those of us who celebrate here in the United States. It's just blowing my mind how fast this year has been going. And I don't have a lot to say right now. I'm just, getting through what was a very, very busy season for us. And now things are getting to slow down and I'm getting to enjoy things a little bit more. And I'm excited to be putting out episodes that I'm actually putting a little bit of heart behind and not just kind of getting a draft together and hoping I captured the essence of the story. So with that, this is definitely an episode where I will not be able to capture the essence of the story just because there is so much that Jane has been credited for and she deserves recognition for. And it would be impossible for me to put all of that into one episode. So without further ado, born Valerie Jane Morris Goodall on April 3rd, 1934, Jane loved the outdoors and animals from the very start. Growing up, she had many family pets, most notably a dog, of course, a horse, and a tortoise. At 8 years old, Jane read Tarzan and Dr. Dolittle, and this sparked something to life inside her. As many can relate, Dr. Dolittle and Tarzan, both books and the movies, are amazing. They had a great way of showing that animals have these big personalities and humanizing those personalities so that it is easy for children to comprehend. She wanted a life like theirs, where she could work with animals and be in their environment. But it wouldn't be an easy road for her to get there. When she graduated high school, she couldn't afford college right away, so she went to a secretarial school in southern Kensington where she learned bookkeeping skills and typing, but still that dream of going to Africa was alive in her mind. She worked as a waitress and for a film company and pinched every penny until at 23 years old, she decided to go visit a friend in none other than Nairobi, Kenya, Africa. It was 1957 and she climbed on board the ship Kenya Castle, and she didn't quite understand how much this trip was going to change her life. It was here on the Kenyan Castle that she met Dr. Louis Seymour Bazet-Leakey, a paleoanthropologist who she sparked a connection with. It didn't take long for Dr. Leakey to recognize something inside her that he saw in himself, and he offered her a job at the local history museum in Nairobi. She eagerly accepted, and though she didn't stay working at the museum long term, she stayed connected with Dr. Leakey, and this is what would eventually propel her life in the direction that we have come to recognize worldwide. In 1960, at 26 years old, Jane set off from her home in England to go to what we now recognize as Tanzania. Dr. Leakey was sending her to Gombe Stream Game Reserve to study chimpanzees. The area was barely touched, and what she would learn here would not only change her life, but the way we saw chimpanzees as a whole. Dr. Leakey was actually using Jane's lack of education in the environmental realm as a huge bonus, because when you combine this with her absolute love for animals, he realized that it would allow her to not be biased with ideas and traditions commonly believed. She would also be able to step into the space with an open mind. To prepare for this, Jane studied primate behavior at the London Zoo. In all, from formulation of the idea to setting off, it took 4 years to finally secure the funding from the Wilkie Brothers Foundation, which helped to support primates in a variety of ways. With this funding, Jane was officially off to what we now know as Gombe National Park. Gombe National Park was once called Gombe Stream National Park. It is located in the Kigoma region of Tanzania. Gombe is a narrow strip of forest along a mountain range, meaning that the park contains both forests, tall peaks, deep valleys, rivers, waterfalls, and an immense amount of green foliage. Within the park bounds, chimpanzees are protected, though there are tourist opportunities for you to be able to potentially view a troop with your own eyes. Here you will also find red-tailed and blue monkeys, which I want you to go Google blue monkeys. They're beautiful creatures. Gombe National Park was established in 1968, and it is one of the smallest national parks, not just in Tanzania, but also in the world. With only 13.5 square miles, it is home to olive baboons, vervet monkeys, leopards, bush pig, hippopotamus, small antelopes, several snake species, and over 200 bird species. Though 25% of Tanzania was set aside for preservation purposes, human encroachment is still having an effect on the wildlife populations. Something that I want to address here, because we could see more of this happening here in America, the human impact on land is impossible to ignore. It may not be seen because when you look at the wilderness, you can't fathom that animals couldn't live there. But many species' home turfs or territories are larger than what we can comprehend. Because of this, in Tanzania, with villages that have been established between parks and rural communities making a living, animals now have human obstacles that they are trying and failing to overcome. Partially because they get caught up in human influence, and this leads to loss of life, much like when you hit a deer with a car. But also, once an animal leaves its protected territory, many places allow hunting to then take place. Of course, with certain rules being enforced. Sometimes that hunting is for food or it could be for safety, but this still has the same outcome. And because of this, many of the species in Tanzania are seeing a decline in population. A big enough decline that there are questions about how certain species could possibly come back from it. And this is something that Jane noticed throughout her time here in the area. Now, when Jane got to Gombe, as she set off into the jungle, she didn't really take much with her. She just had a notebook and binoculars and an unmatched curiosity as she entered the forest. When she arrived to Lake Tanganyika on July 14th of 1960, she spent the first few weeks kind of going really slow because she ended up with a fever and she was unable to really venture into the forest. And it was later determined that she most likely had malaria, which can be deadly. But once she recovered, she made her way through this thick, untouched vegetation. For weeks, she didn't see any chimpanzees until one day she saw one. He was an older male who Jane would name David Graybeard. She soon learned that he was one of the more dominant males of a troop, And with his acceptance of Jane watching him, others began to allow Jane to watch them as well. Finally, though, she didn't just sit and observe, but she completely immersed herself into their lives. There would be no way for her to learn what she did without doing so. She found that they were very individualistic, much like humans, with different feelings and reactions to events, and as they formed a lifelong friendship and relationship with the animals surrounding them, their lives improved. It was David Greybeard who she spotted using a stiff blade of grass where he had stripped the leaves off to insert it into termite holes, waiting for the termites to climb onto the grass before he would pull it out and eat the termites from that blade of grass. She learned that chimpanzees were omnivores rather than herbivores, as we previously believed, and would even work together to hunt for prey. It was after her watching them consume a hog that she realized that, and thus the world learned, that they didn't just eat plants, like we just kind of assumed. In one instance, she observed a hunting party organized where groups of males were working together to capture colobus monkeys, and they shared their catch with each other afterwards. This emphasized their societies within the troops and how they coordinated to use different elements of a strategy and social negotiation in order to get food and then have everyone thrive, not just one. This sharing of their meal reinforced the alliances and the hierarchies within the troop, revealing a sophisticated social economy that is very similar to how human cooperation and reciprocity is experienced today. This observation of hunting also challenged ideas about aggression and predation, showing that violence and cooperation coexist in complex ways in our closest relative. She witnessed them using these tools and thus leading us to redefine humans, since it was believed that humans were the only ones capable of making tools. And then she made the astonishing discovery that chimps were able to assess their needs and make and modify the elements around them to create those tools to solve their problems that they were having. This was also a predominantly human trait as once believed, but now we know that many species use tools in order to make their lives easier. When she told this to Dr. Leakey, he was quoted saying, and this has apparently been a very popular quote, and that is, quote, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as human." It was this that led us on the long road of redefining what being a human is, while also recognizing that humans are not the only creatures with intelligence. As the divide between human and primates and other animals lessened, it became common knowledge that animals hold emotions, they are intelligent, and they have many cultural habits and family-oriented processes. Different species hold complex familial bonds, they form alliances, and can even wage war on each other. While generally this is thought to be a human, political, strategical driven demonstration, it is turning out to be less and less true. In 1962, Jane entered into a doctoral program at Cambridge University where she went head to head with many scientists who had been in the field much longer than she had, but never fully immersed themselves in the field like she had. She fought with them over how she named the chimpanzees instead of identifying them by numbers. She named David Greybeard, Flo, Fifi, Goliath, Passion, along with many others. And they scoffed at her when she told them that chimpanzees have emotions, personalities. And then when National Geographic published her first book, My Friends, the Wild Chimpanzees, they were outraged. But still, Jane persevered. She earned her PhD on February 9th of 1966, where she then went back to Gombe to study chimpanzees for another 20 years. In the 1970s, she witnessed a war between two troops of chimpanzees, the Kahama troop and the Kasakela troop. What became known as the Gombe Chimpanzee War or the 4-Year War, what started out as a conflict became something a little bit bigger. It spanned 4 years, And the conflict between these two troops of chimpanzees had once been a single, peaceful community. Over the years, males from one group systematically attacked and killed members of the rival troop, eventually exterminating them. This was the first recorded instance of intergroup warfare among non-human animals. The conflict revealed that chimpanzees are capable of deliberate, organized violence driven by territorial power and competition. While deeply disturbed by these events, Jane's view of chimpanzees as inherently peaceful creatures was shattered. Yet, this discovery shed light on the biological roots of human aggression and warfare, suggesting that the behaviors might have deep evolutionary origins rather than being a purely cultural innovation. She witnessed the violent behavior of Passion and Palm, a mother and daughter duo who would take babies from within their community and kill them and then sometimes consume them as well. Cannibalism is something that humans of American, European, and many other nations strongly feel is wrong. But it is something that is done and held culturally around the world as an acceptable form of cultural expression. Her work and discoveries continued to eat up the ground we thought we walked on, and her findings didn't just help us understand primates, but ourselves as the human species as well. It is Jane's patience and caring demeanor that can be credited for the massive discoveries that changed the long-held assumptions when it came to animals and humans and how far separated we are, or how close we are. She highlighted the social, emotional, cognitive, and even the cultural aspects of chimpanzees over the course of more than 6 decades. The cup that overflowed to a greater understanding of not just other primates, but other animal species as well. She found that dominance among males is maintained not only through physical strength, but also through social intelligence, coalition building, and charisma. Their personality plays a huge role in how they are able to win over the members of their troop. The alpha male's role often depends on the supports of other males and even females, suggesting that the power in chimpanzee society is negotiated as much as it is fought for. Females, too, have their own hierarchies, typically based on age, personality, and maternal experience. Females which are higher up have better access to food and social support, which can translate to higher offspring survival rates, much like we see in our human culture. Jane's observations of the emotional lives of chimpanzees was what really shook up the scientific field, who didn't believe that primates were capable of feeling. She noted that they expressed affection through grooming, they would embrace each other, kiss each other, and hold each other's hands. The bonds she witnessed between mothers and their babies was deep and so similar to what is seen in humans. Chimpanzee mothers provide constant care to their young, teaching them vital skills such as tool use, foraging techniques, and social etiquette. Meanwhile, the hard reality of nature is that orphan infants often suffer emotionally, and some even die from neglect and grief. Besides the structure of their troop, Jane also noted a huge array of personalities that she found among the troops. She saw that there were chimps that were more playful and kind and jokesters. She saw that there were chimps that took their leadership roles more seriously. Some of the chimps were even domineering and ruthless and bold and shy. Just like the communities had to work together to thrive, Jane witnessed the individuals hold separate understandings of their lives. Much like with social structures and personalities, Jane found that the troops held traditions and behaviors that were passed down generation to generation. To circle back to the grass blade to get termites out of the holes, not all chimpanzees used grass, as some used thin sticks. When it came to nuts, some would smash the nut with their hands while others would smash it with a stone. While this, as it is passed down, is learned behavior, the one who figured it out in the first place shows how insightful and imaginative they can be, while the information being passed down highlights how easily they can learn and take in new information. Beyond this, Jane's work expanded into other primates as well as conservation and ethics. She, of course, dedicated her life to protecting these amazing creatures as well as their habitat. She fought against deforestation, hunting, and illegal pet trade, and she didn't stop there. Despite all of this incredible work that Jane has done over her entire life, there were instances where she found herself on the receiving end of how violent chimpanzees can be. And this is your quick reminder that humans share roughly 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Is anyone really surprised at how we humans are also capable of horrendously violent behavior? Because I am not. But of course, Jane's work was not always, not even most of the time, sunshine and rainbows.
Are you tired of hearing about the Ted Bundys and Jeffrey Dahmers on True Crime Podcasts? I thought so. We've got something just for you. I'm Pat.
And I'm Darcy, and we are the hosts of Pod of Terror, a true crime podcast that dives into lesser-known cases from around the world.
Grab a glass of wine and join us every Thursday as we discuss the most vile, despicable human beings on the planet.
It'll be a dark and twisted journey, so don't forget your drink. You're gonna need it.
We're looking forward to seeing you next Thursday.
In 1989, Jane was attacked by Frodo, a male chimpanzee along with a few other males. Frodo was the alpha male of the Kasakela troop, to which he seemed to, quote, rule with an iron fist. Jane had noted a history of his violent behavior between both humans they encountered and also the other members within his community. From a young age, Jane noted that Frodo was aggressive. He would throw rocks at others at 3 years old, and he would even grab and drag others through the brush. A year prior, Frodo attacked Gary Larson, who was a cartoonist, and he was in Gombe, and he luckily only suffered some scrapes and bruises. Jane was not so lucky, though. And while we do not have the details of what happened or the specific injuries, Jane did require medical treatment where she had damage to her head and neck due to being violently shaken. This attack could have ended her life, but it was Jane's deep and thorough understanding that resulted in her being able to become a trusted part of this group. Frodo was, as noted, a vicious animal. Hold on to your hearts here. Really sadly, he had stolen someone's 1-year-old child, a human child, where he had then killed and then consumed parts of that child. It was this incident that finally sparked conversations of potentially putting Frodo down because he was so aggressive. But in 2002, he became sick, and something about him was just never quite right again in a more positive light. He lived another decade without having any more incidents. There were other instances where Jane was attacked or harmed in some way, like the time that she was hit on the back of the head by an angry chimp, and then he started almost trying to confront her, like he was behaving aggressively near her. In this situation, Jane did not react. She didn't wave her arms or scream or talk to him, and eventually he left her alone. Then in a separate incident, a tree was knocked down and it landed right next to where she had been sitting. This was again done by Frodo, and this caused Jane to start taking some greater precautions, which included bringing 2 park guards with her when she was going to see Frodo's troop. Over the decades, even with the hard times, or especially with the hard times, Jane's insights has had significant scientific and philosophical impacts. It was her work that contributed to the growing understanding that the difference between human and other primates are of degree, not of kind. Even more, her discoveries encouraged scientists and the public alike to reconsider humanity's place in nature, not as detached observers or rulers, but as participants. Through these insights, Jane helped to redefine our place in nature. The boundary between man and animal became more blurry, yet at the same time more defined. By revealing that traits such as cooperation, aggression, compassion, communication, and even innovation are not uniquely human. Jane showed us that what separates us from other primates is not this gaping chasm, but more a slope on the spectrum of our differences. In doing so, she not only transformed primatology, but she also reshaped modern ethics, inspiring a greater respect for animals and a recognition that the roots of our humanity are quite literally shared. In 1977, Jane established the Jane Goodall Institute, which is a community-led conservation organization. And then in 1991, she created the Roots and Shoots program to encourage children to participate in projects in their community that would help protect wildlife and the environment. Jane has stood up for the environment for more than 60 years, not just through her research, but also through tireless global advocacy for wildlife, ecosystems, and sustainable living. Her environmental activism grew naturally out of her scientific work. After years of observing chimpanzees, she watched their forests disappear and their populations shrink due to that deforestation, along with poaching and human encroachment. Rather than staying in the field as a detached researcher like many encouraged her to do, she made a conscious decision to leave her beloved chimpanzees for much of the year to speak out on their behalf. From that moment on, Jane became something more than just a scientist. She became one of the world's most respected environmental defenders. She stood up for the environment by confronting the root causes of ecological destruction, greed, ignorance, and short-term rewards. She spoke against deforestation, the illegal wildlife trade, and the unsustainable agricultural practices, while also promoting community-based conservation as the key to protecting both people and nature. It is through the Jane Goodall Institute that she developed programs that empowered local communities to become stewards of their own land. In the regions around Gombe, she worked with villages to introduce sustainable farming, microcredit programs for women, and reforestation projects. This was revolutionary at the time, as the approach rejected the traditional fortress conservation model that excluded people from protected areas. Instead, Jane argued that conservation could only succeed if it improved human lives as well, a message that transformed the global conservation movement and inspired similar efforts across Africa and in Asia and Latin America as well. As her role shifted from research to activism, Jane often found herself at odds with powerful institutes and industries. Much as she had when she was younger, she didn't back down. She went toe-to-toe with government officials, corporate leaders who prioritized economic growth over environmental protection. Like the time, she criticized logging companies that destroyed African forests for profit and governments that allowed the trade in bushmeat and live primates to continue unchecked. In the 1980s and the 1990s, she confronted laboratories and research institutions that conducted invasive experiments on chimpanzees, exposing the suffering and the ethical violations involved. Her advocacy contributed to growing public pressure that eventually led to major reform, including the eventual end of most biomedical testing on chimpanzees in the United States and Europe. She challenged large-scale agricultural and industrial systems, including factory farming and palm oil production, which have devastating effects on wildlife habitats. She frequently spoke out against the meat industry, contributing to deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, and animal cruelty. These stances sometimes put her at odds with corporations, policymakers, and even parts of the public who resist these calls for change. However, she always approached conflict with diplomacy and calm resolve rather than anger. It truly was her strength and her ability to appeal to people's sense of morality and shared humanity, which encouraged them to act not out of guilt, but out of compassion and responsibility. Throughout her career, Jane challenged scientists, conservationists, and educators to be better, to rethink how they interact with nature and their communities affected by conservation efforts. Over time, it was her approach that reshaped behavioral science, introduced empathy and observation as legitimate tools for understanding animal life. Later, she urged scientists to move beyond data collection towards ethical engagement, to use their research to advocate for the preservation of the species and the ecosystems that they studied. Even bigger, Jane has challenged world leaders, huge corporations, and ordinary citizens to be better stewards of the planet. She has addressed the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and numerous global summits, urging political and business leaders to take climate change and pollution seriously. She often portrayed her thoughts in moral and emotional terms, reminding leaders that economic progress means little on a dying planet. Even when speaking to oil executives or policymakers, she maintained her characteristic calmness and optimism, but her message was clear. Humanity has a duty to protect the earth and its inhabitants. Jane then also focused her challenge on younger generations, whom she sees as the greatest hope for the planet's future. In 1991, she founded the Roots and Shoots program to empower youth to take local action for global change. The program's name reflects her belief that even small efforts, like roots and shoots breaking through the ground or concrete, can transform the world over time. Through education, community service, and environmental projects, she has inspired millions to see themselves as changemakers. This helped to inspire younger generations to take responsibility for helping to heal the environment around them, while also confronting those who refuse to believe that their actions cause any harm at all. Of course, her advocacy has not been without resistance. Some critics have dismissed her calls for ethical and spiritual renewal as idealistic or overly sentimental. Yet, Jane persisted, and with the growing urgency of environmental crisis, many of the critics have fallen silent. Between these two programs, 340 million acres have been protected under the conservation action plans. The Gombe Stream Research Center has published 482 scientific research papers. Nearly 300 chimpanzees and gorillas are cared for by the Jane Goodall Institute, with almost 200 people being trained on how to use forest monitoring technology. And there are far more incredible statistics when you expand out to the communities surrounding Gombe National Park. Jane's influence reaches far beyond the boundaries of science. Her work has had deep and lasting social impacts on how people think about animals, the environment, and humanity's role in the natural world. But another major impact of Jane's work lies in her pioneering role as a woman in science. When she began her fieldwork in 1960s, primatology and anthropology were male-dominated disciplines. Her success, achieved through patience, intuition, and deep emotional intelligence, rather than traditional scientific detachment, challenged stereotypes about who could be a scientist and how science could be done. Jane's career inspired generations of women to enter scientific fields and to approach research with both determination and compassion. Her story demonstrates that empathy and observation are not weaknesses in science, but powerful tools for discovery. It was this that helped to redefine the image of scientist itself, broadening both the methods and the people included in the scientific inquiry. On October 1st, 2025, just 7 weeks ago, Jane Goodall passed away. Even at 91 years old, Jane was traveling 300 days a year to give speeches, advocate for the environment and wildlife conservation, and trying to protect critical habitats. She dedicated herself to raise funds to support programs that helped to protect chimpanzees, as well as the surrounding ecosystem, and raising awareness for the fact that we are not so different from them. While, like many in these episodes, It would be impossible to accurately summarize a person's life in one simple episode. I will do what I can to outline here the massive impact that Jane Goodall had on not only wildlife, conservation, and science, but on your life and my life as well. Jane's social impact is hard to capture as a whole. Even in her death, she will still be making strides and vying for change. It is through each and every one of us who looked up to her as a role model, who will continue to follow in her footsteps and fight for what we know to be true about Earth, the environment, and these precious species that survive here. She reshaped humanity's moral and emotional relationship with animals, empowered women and young people in science and activism, revolutionized conservation by aligning with the human well-being, and became one of the most trusted and compassionate voices for the planet. Through her life and work, she has reminded the world that empathy and science can, in fact, coexist, and that lasting change begins not with grand gestures, but with individuals choosing to care. Jane stood up for the environment by standing up for interconnectedness, the idea that well-being of human, animal, and ecosystems are inseparable. She has challenged scientists to see with compassion, corporations to act with conscience, leaders to plan for long-term, and individuals to live with awareness and kindness. Even at over 90 years old, she continued to travel, lecture, advocate tirelessly, embody her own message of hope and perseverance. Through her gentle but unyielding activism, she has shown that true courage lies not in confrontation, but in the steadfast defense of what is right, our shared home and the life that sustains it. Our world has now said goodbye to one of the most incredible figures. For more than 6 decades, she stood as a beacon of light in a time of growing darkness. When species disappeared, forests fell, and humanity seemed to drift farther away from the natural world. Though her quiet strength and tireless devotion, she reminded us that empathy is not weakness, but wisdom, that curiosity can be an act of love, and that one person's persistence can change the course of history. What the world will miss most about Jane Goodall is her ability to give a voice to the voiceless. She translated the lives of chimpanzees and other wild creatures into human understanding, helping us to see that they too feel joy, grief, love, and fear. Through her, animals were no longer subjects to be studied, but beings to be respected. Her discoveries shattered the illusion of human superiority and forced us to see that we share a deep kinship with the natural world. Without her, the global dialogue on animal welfare and empathy loses one of its most trusted, gentle, and convincing voices. Whether addressing global summits or classrooms full of children, she carried herself with the same grace and unwavering belief that change begins with understanding. Her calm but commanding presence reminded people that hope is not naive, it is necessary. In an age where outrage often drowns out empathy, her voice offered something purer, a quiet insistence that goodness still matters. She insisted that real conservation must help people too, providing education, sustainable livelihoods, and hope. The vision changed how the world approached environmental protections, replacing exclusion with empowerment. Even though her passing marks the end of an era, it does not mean the end of her influence. The science she revolutionized will continue to evolve, and the conservation models that she pioneered will continue to guide communities around the world. Her institute, her programs, and the millions that she inspired will carry her mission forward. Jane often said that hope is not passive, it is action. Her legacy lives in every sanctuary protecting animals, every young person planting a tree, every voice speaking out for the planet. In the end, Jane's life reminded us that one person, armed with compassion and conviction, can shift the moral compass of the world. We will miss her voice, her presence, and her quiet grace. We will miss the way that she made us feel, capable of goodness, of healing, of change. But hope is not lost because the seeds she planted in hearts and minds around the world have already taken root. The world may have lost a beacon of light, but Jane Goodall's light has not gone out. It has merely spread, illuminating the path forward for all who choose to follow it. Thank you for listening. I did not expect to cry so much with that one. I hope Jane inspired you as much as she has inspired me. And we will talk next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.